Question.
Thank you. Could I ask the Minister about the recent OECD Employment Outlook, which found, amongst other things, that Ireland has the second highest percentage of low-paid jobs of countries of the OECD, second only to the US. Is that the model of recovery that the government is in favour of? Low-wage, precarious, short-term contract. In other words, a recovery for the rich, a recovery for the corporations at the expense of working people. Can I ask the Minister if he is in favour of wage rises generally across the economy, and in particular in favour of a rise in the minimum wage?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much. The OECD Employment Outlook 2014 contains data on the incidence of low and high pay in OECD countries, and in this context the report defines the incidence of low pay as referring to the share of workers earning less than two-thirds of median earnings. The report actually ranks Ireland in fourth position with 21.8%, not second, behind the United States, Korea and Israel with 25.3%, 25.1% and 22.1% respectively, and followed closely by Canada with 21.7% and Poland with 21.6%. But significantly, the report also shows Irish average earnings in 2013 were the sixth highest of the 34 countries compared in terms of purchasing power parity. The national minimum wage in Ireland is relatively high by international standards. Most recent figures published by Eurostat show that Ireland's rate is the fourth highest among the 21 EU member states that have a national minimum wage, but when the cost of living is taken into account, Ireland's rate is the fifth highest. The most recent figures from the CSO's quarterly earnings, hours and employment cost survey show that 4.7% of all employees, or just over 73,000 workers, were being paid the adult experience national minimum wage of $8.65 per hour or less in quarter 2 2014. In the first instance, the decision to restore the national minimum wage to $8.65 per hour with effect from 1 July 2011, together with the decision to put the Joint Labour Committee system on a more secure legal and constitutional footing and reinstate a robust system of protection for workers, represented a very significant commitment by this government to protect the lowest paid and the most vulnerable workers. Secondly, as the Deputy will be aware, there is a commitment in the Statement of Government Priorities to establish the Low Pay Commission on a statutory basis as an independent body to make recommendations to the government about the appropriate level of the minimum wage and related matters, and with a view to ensuring that the Low Pay Commission is in a position to carry out its functions as soon as possible. I will establish the Low Pay Commission, and I'm in the process of establishing it on an administrative basis, and legislation to provide for its establishment will be brought forward early next year to
Thank you, Minister.
Statutory footing.
Come back to the Minister. Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks. Well, I think it's difficult to dispute the fact that low pay is rife in Ireland. I mean, and you can compare in many, many different ways, but let's compare across the EU, where compared to EU 15 countries, Irish wage compensation in the private sector is 14% below average. When you compare it to other EU countries not in a bailout, Ireland is 21% below average. When it compared to economies which are small and open, some of the Nordic countries in particular, Ireland falls 30% below average. So Ireland has a problem with low pay. One result is that 1 in 4 families with at least one person in work suffer from multiple deprivation experiences. 16% of employees live below the poverty line. We have a whole creation of a sector of the workforce that are incredibly low paid, something that is subsidised by the state. Low pay employers being subsidised by the state through the likes of family income supplement. And surely the government has to do something about it. And I would argue that wage rises are a much more effective way of targeting that than tax cuts.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I certainly support wage rises in profitable companies and where circumstances allow. And to concisely answer the Deputy's question in relation to where I stand in relation to the national minimum are in the process of setting up the Low Pay Commission, and I would be in favour of ensuring that there are changes to the rate of the national minimum wage on a progressive basis where the circumstances allow. And while we are clearly creating jobs across this economy, recovery shouldn't be allowed to be characterised by any class of a race to the bottom. It's really important that people's pay and terms and conditions are protected and secured, and we are taking measures to ensure that that is the case. That's why we've re-established the Joint Labour Committee system. It's why we are working to reinstate registered employment agreements, and it's why we are making very significant progress indeed in relation to Ireland's collective bargaining laws, because we need to do that, and we need to make sure that the jobs that we are creating are decent and are sustainable, and that people are well paid.
Thank you. Deputy Murphy.
I think the problem is, though, the government is not a neutral bystander in this situation. I mean, the government has policies and implements policies that encourage the creation of a very low-wage sector in our economy, and many of them represent subsidies to employers. I mean, one example, which obviously I've raised repeatedly, is the question of JobBridge. This is a different angle, but whereby, I mean, JobBridge costs the state directly somewhere around €60 million a year in terms of payments to those who are on the JobBridge scheme. But it costs the state multiples other of that in terms of lost employers' PRSI and lost employee income taxes, because allowing companies to benefit from labour for free. What's happened in this country, under the guise of the crisis, under the guise of the need to improve competitiveness, is the share of wages relative to the share of profit has continued to plummet. The IMF found that Ireland had the largest decline in the labour share in the industrialised countries between 1970 and 2012. That process has continued, and it can only be reversed by strong trade union movement, legislation to go with that, but also legislation by the government in relation to minimum wage.
Final reply, Minister.
I think the last thing I could be accused of is showing away from my responsibilities to protect the interests of low-paid workers, to ensure that the jobs that we are creating pay well, and we are revising and, I think, reframing a legislative framework to ensure that we can do that. And since Deputy Murphy arrived in this House just a few short weeks ago, I haven't found him to be engaging at all, really, on those type of issues that can ensure that we develop the type of framework that those of us on the left want to see, and actually everybody in society, I think, wants to see, in terms of protecting people's incomes, promoting employment growth, and ensuring that the jobs we are creating are decent and sustainable. So I would encourage Deputy Murphy and others who profess to be of the left in this House to engage with government, and they should not be immune from being in a position where they might actually find sometime they might want to support a government initiative around, for example, the national minimum wage, joint labour committees, registered employment agreements and collective bargaining. So I look forward to Deputy Murphy's positive engagement on that front.
Thank you, Minister. Now, other questions. Deputy Dennis Naughton has number 6.
Thank you.